Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 14 of the Money Side Up podcast, second episode of 2025, and we're recording this mid-Feb, so hard to believe just how quickly this year is racing by. There is a lot to cover, but before we get into it today, just by way of quick introduction, my name is Jarrad Brown, Senior Financial Advisor here in Singapore, and joining me as is common practice these days, my colleague and friend Will Cant down in New South Wales. G'day, Will.
Hey, Jarrad, as always, good to be here. Now, before we do get into it, quick disclaimer for the legal side, as always. Our podcast today, it's for educational purposes, so definitely don't race off the back of listening to this today and make any drastic changes. If you guys do want to get any help or want to change anything with your finances, definitely seek out some, personal tailored advice from a financial advisor or accountant or whatnot. Today's conversation will just be general in nature. Now, Jarrad, as you touched on, it's February already that we're recording this. January seemed like it didn't even really exist. It seemed like it went past so fast, but obviously a lot's happening in the world. We're recording this just a few days before the RBA are set to meet. Very big interest rate decision coming up. I believe the market at the moment is factoring in a 93% chance that there will be a cut. Big four banks are estimating there will be a cut as well. I personally would love to see a cut. I think most people in Australia are paying probably around the mid to low sixes on their mortgage, with this cut potentially getting down into the high fives. Hopefully, as people listen to this and it comes out after the decision, I haven't, stepped in it and gone too far and estimated there would be a cut, but all signs are looking quite positive there.
Yeah, look, it's exactly right. And I mean, to be honest, I'm a little bit on the fence in terms of which way it could go. I think there's probably an argument for both. I think the RBA has been a little bit slow in cutting rates in general, but, obviously we're probably 2-3 months away from the Aussie election. The RBA doesn't really like to influence any sort of decision-making with that, and obviously a rate cut could potentially in terms of what that does to the market. I think, Michelle and the board are also a little bit cautious, just sort of reading some of their commentary and the rhetoric around cutting too early. You really get the impression that they'd much rather be too late to the party, which I think they're doing a great job at, than being too early and having to cut and then inflation spikes again, and then, us trying to sort of correct that path. So, look, I think it'll be an interesting one. I mean, yes, I have debt in Australia as well. A lower mortgage would be lovely. We've already got fixed rates in the fives. I think most banks will be pretty quick to pass it on as well. But I also think at the same time, when we look back at, say, this time late next year, it won't have much mattered whether we get the cut in Feb or we get it in May. We're probably going to get somewhere between 1 and 3 cuts this year and maybe 1 and 3 next. And that's about where things might settle. So, maybe coming into 2027, maybe your mortgage starts with a 4. It'd be lovely to say it's going to start with a 1 or a 2 again. Wouldn't that be lovely? But I really don't think that's going to happen, barring any sort of major surprise. And I think on the back of that, it'll be interesting to see what property prices do. Everything sort of sub 1.2, 1.5's had a really good run over the last 12, 18 months, especially if you're in Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane markets. Melbourne probably one of the key exceptions there. But anything between about 1.5 and say 4 or 5 before you get into that luxury market, I think it's actually been quite soft. So a lot of those people can't refinance. They can't quite borrow what they could 2 years ago when rates were much lower. So I think it's quite a number just sitting on the fence there. They're either renovating or they're waiting for the move, waiting for something to happen. So I think that whole segment will be very interesting to watch when we do get that RBA update.
I actually saw a news article recently too as well. Labor government bringing in potentially another promise in the mortgage space, saying that they won't assess HECS or help debts for first borrowers. I believe the terminology was if they're near the end of the term or something like that. So whatever that means, it was quite ambiguous the way it read. But that's, again, just another boost there, obviously, for potential first home buyers or people with, HECS debts that are struggling, like you said, to maybe be able to refinance or get a mortgage. But I think it's a key thing for people to consider is, it's known as the loyalty tax, right? Where you stay with the same bank for a long period of time. They're not going to continue to lower your rates, without you prompting them effectively a lot of the time. So it is a good reminder, to look at your mortgage. What rate are you getting? Is there anything better out there that you could potentially get? And then while you're doing that, have a review of your whole strategy. As you touched on, the property's been doing quite well. Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane really leading the market. Is there potential to buy another property or, recycle some of the debt that you've got or do some small renovations or anything like that? It's definitely a good time as this rate cycle starts to, come down to review your overall strategy, review your mortgage and make sure you are on top of everything.
It's exactly right. And the HEX one's a really interesting one. And I think it catches a lot of people off guard because HEX, unlike your other liabilities, is assessed on income, not on the actual bill. So a lot of people think, I'll reduce my HEX and then, my borrowing capacity will go up, which is actually not true at all. Because whether your HEX is, $300,000 or 50 grand, your assumed repayment is just based on how much you earn. And I think that catches a lot of expats by surprise a lot of the time as well, especially when you look at the way a lot of Aussie banks will shade income, apply foreign exchange buffers. Some of the banks will even take Australian tax rates rather than your net income. So you then throw in a fully assessed HEX bill, and all of a sudden you thought you could borrow 2 million and now it's 1.2. So in some cases, I think reviewing your HEX is just a really good idea in general. If you can, if it does make sense, get rid of it. If you can't, so be it. But just be mindful, I think, of how that does impact borrowing capacity overall. I guess the other big one, politically, obviously, we've got the Aussie election, but I guess, what we are reading a lot of at the moment is tariffs. Tariffs for you, tariffs for me. I think the most recent article was Australia's leadership having a call with Trump with some perhaps wishful thinking with what the result may have been there. I think that was very quickly shot to dust, I guess. The tariffs are there without exceptions, no matter who you are. And I don't think that's really come as a major surprise. I think there will be a lot of surprises with Trump's second term, but at the same time, this sort of predictable, unpredictable behavior, I think is exactly what we should expect. Tariffs, it's protectionist. What does it mean for asset prices? Well, potentially that the US dollar strengthens, potentially that we get a little bit of upward pressure on rates. Now, I don't think that that's going to mean interest rates get lifted, but I do think it will mean that interest rates get cut slower in the US. So, for us as expats, we've got to think about what that means currency-wise. And even, we look at our Aussie equity portfolio as well, and, just digging through, which companies have US exposure and US earnings and, may not only benefit from the US dollar, but even tax changes, regulatory changes. I think a lot of the sort of clauses and changes that Trump brought in his first term will sunset later this year and hopefully be extended. I think it's a really important one to watch.
And I think that's a great point you made, Des. A lot of people don't realize that when these, negatives in quotation marks are happening, people see tariffs as a negative and all this volatility and the spontaneity of Trump, that doesn't mean that there's not opportunity out there. In fact, that's quite the opposite. And generally when there's these big changes, that's when there's lots of opportunity out there and you can really capitalize on it, like you said. It's just about sometimes, thinking outside the box a little bit, like, as you said, Australian businesses that potentially will profit off that exposure from the US dollar increasing. So it's a matter of, again, just reviewing things and saying, right, what's the purpose of my investments? Where am I trying to get to, with this style and this approach I'm taking on? Is there any way that I can capitalize on this volatility for potentially the next 4 years? That could happen, back to back for the next 4 years, really. So, a good time to be reviewing things, definitely.
Absolutely. Well, look, we might dive into our guest interview today. We've obviously touched a little bit on rates, a little bit on Australian property, and I think it flows in really nicely to our guest today, Ashleigh Goodchild, one of the leaders in the Western Australian, if not the Australian property management space. Obviously, a lot of our, not just expat, but also Australian resident clients own investment properties or aspire to own investment properties. And quite often that will mean engaging a professional property manager. So how do you find good ones? How do you know if you're getting ripped off, getting charged the right price? How do you actually assess? And what do you need to know? And I think, from our chat with her, there's probably been a lot more there than a lot may realize. So let's dive into it and see what she's got to share with us.
Let's get to it.
Fantastic. Well, look, a very, very warm welcome to Ashleigh Goodchild. Thank you very much for joining us today, Ashleigh.
My pleasure.
Now, look, Ashleigh is one of the leading voices in, I think, property in Australia, I think it would be fair to say, but definitely a well-recognised name in the South Perth property market. That's how I came to know Ashleigh, a director of SOCO Realty, also teaches quite a number of property managers in how to build the right business. I mean, personally, I bought my first property, about 17 years ago now. It makes me feel old, and have been through my share of, I would say, questionable people in the property management industry. And it's probably not until we've landed on Ashleigh, started working with Ashleigh and her team personally, that we've actually sort of come to realize that there are really some outstanding people in this space. Now, Ashleigh's not paid us to be here, nor have we paid her. So that is just purely unbiased feedback on our experience. So, and obviously a lot of expats, we do have properties back home in Australia, whether we're looking to buy the forever home to rent it out, we're looking to rent out a home we lived in, we're looking to buy something that's pure investment, and naturally property management is usually a big part of that. It's something we all have to deal with. So we're going to tackle a lot today. Both, Will and I have been down the landlord path, so we certainly have our personal experiences, I guess, to touch on. But actually, I guess as a bit of a starting point, maybe you can, tell us a bit about your background, start wherever you'd like to start, and I guess what got you into property in the first place.
Every person you ask about how they got into property management will always tell you how they fell into it accidentally. So no different with me. I fell into it after doing some naturopathy study, and then I got a reception job and ended up starting with a company where the business owner was an air hostess and a pilot, and they really had no idea. So I was put into the deep end with having to help navigate the business alongside them as well. They're no longer in business, and I am. And I started when I was 18. So for my whole adult life, I have been in real estate. And I started my business when I was 23, so about 21 years ago, and it was purely just for that lifestyle. I'm always naturally someone who always thinks one step ahead, and so for me at 23, I knew that I wanted to have children over the next couple of years, and I also knew that I wanted to continue having an income and not having time off during that time. So the next step would be to have a business. The truth is that I would have gone into business regardless of what industry I was working in. I could have been a hairdresser at the time and I would have started a hairdressing business. I just happened to be in real estate, so started a real estate business. And it was purely for that reason. It was a lifestyle only. I just wanted to be able to have a passive income coming through while I had children and not have that stress. Fortunately, at the same time, my brother-in-law, who was also in real estate but doing sales, he was also in a situation where he was ready to move. So it just made sense that the two of us started together, and that's what we did. Our thoughts have always been, as a family business, we've always put lifestyle first. It was never about money or income or anything like that. We both just wanted the ability to be able to drop kids to school, pick them up, and not have any control or pressure by a boss. So that is really how that all started.
Now, I guess, look, one of the questions, and we'll dive straight into, I guess, some of what we think is going to be helpful content for our community is, if somebody's trying to find a property manager, I mean, for some, they might just look at the names they're familiar with, the sort of bigger real estate firms. But, and I mean, I can certainly speak from personal experience, that doesn't always create the best scenario. In many cases, sometimes the, complete opposite of that. But what are some of the qualities if somebody's starting out, they don't really sort of know anybody in the space? What are some of the qualities or even the red flags somebody should look out for when choosing a property manager?
So this will be a little bit controversial, but I'm not here to sort of upset anyone. But I have definitely seen a big difference with the whoever owns the real estate business. And there are a lot of real estate businesses that are owned by sales-led directors. So that's the very heavy in the sales department. The principal is also selling. Generally, they're a high performer and they're fantastic. If you're going to sell your property, you would sell through them. What happens is those same sales-led directors decide that they want to have a property management department because that's where the asset of the business is. And quite often it's seen typically as a bit of a poor cousin. the property management department, and they don't necessarily put a lot of energy into that department because that's not what they love. They don't love that. So one of my red flags would be a business potentially with a very high performing selling director. I think that something that's really important for people to look for is number one, is there a business owner is property management focused? And obviously in our business, we are. So Bill does do sales, but I do property management, but I'm 100% focused and interactive with our property management every day. That's one of the things I think people should look for. I feel like quite often when people are looking for a property manager, the first thing they do is Google. I think Google's fine, but I wouldn't be distracted by who's coming to the top of the list necessarily. I would be definitely looking at their Google reviews. I think that's a really good starting point as well. And then the third thing would be to, when you speak to the property manager or the BDM, something that I don't think people understand is that every office works a little bit differently. So there is a task-based and there is a portfolio-based management. And you don't know these questions to ask in the first place. So you just assume, or an investor would just assume, that every office is run the same way. So portfolio, so that would be the question I would be asking as an investor. Call up and say, does your office practice portfolio or task-based management? Task-based is when they've got a separate person that does the leasing, a separate person who does the inspections, a separate person maybe that handles the tenants, someone else that handles the owners. And that business will tell you why that is the best option for you. I have trialed that about 10 years ago. The minute I had my third complaint in a week from a client, I was like, we're scrapping that. We're not doing that anymore. Yeah, I was doing it because I thought, okay, maybe I need to move with the times. Maybe that's what I need to change in the business. And I should have stuck with my gut, because portfolio management is what we practice. It's the best thing for clients. It's really important that there is what I call a healthy love triangle between the tenant, the owner, and the property manager. And it's very easy to do that with one person and not bring too many people into the pile. So portfolio management, I think, is something that sits best for our clients, and it sits best for the way that our team is structured. And I think it's a very important question for people to ask when they're appointing someone.
It's so interesting because, as you know, investors and expats buying back in Australia, that's something that probably wouldn't even cross most people's mind, how their business actually runs at that internal level. So I suppose you're saying there that the key things to think about are, first and foremost, Google's a great place to start, but don't just look at the top of the list. Look at some reviews, get that detail, and then obviously potentially calling up, the prospects of the business that you want to use and get some more details on how they run their business and what it would look like to the client. I think that's great feedback.
Yep. And one more question that I think is a really great one to ask, I do encourage clients to ask this question, is who do I speak to when that property manager is on leave, or if I need to escalate an issue? So my clients know that their property manager is their point of contact, but at any time they need a second opinion on something, that property manager's on leave or sick, or something needs to be escalated, they know that I'm always available. And I think that that's really good peace of mind, because you need to know who that person is. And I know that from a business ourselves, I jump in when people are on leave, or if they're sick, or maybe I'm in between property managers. That's my responsibility as a business owner. Over Christmas, I had 5 people on leave. And so I was handling 5 inboxes, 5 phones being diverted. And I do take a lot of responsibility as a business owner that that's my job to do. And I don't like putting too much pressure on the rest of my team to have to help those team members when they're on leave. So I feel like that's that benefit of having a property management focused director in the business, because I never put that pressure on any of my team members. That's my responsibility.
The joys of being an entrepreneur, am I right?
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's back except for one at the moment. So you've got me on the end streak.
So you touched on a few points there too on some big mistakes that people make, like, just going for top of Google, or not delving into, who they're actually using, or not asking any further questions. Are there any other, really big mistakes that you see people do every single day, when they're choosing a property manager?
I mean, you could say that they're making the mistake with only basing it on fees. I think that if when people are negotiating on fees, really, we're not actually talking about a huge amount of money, but it looks like a huge amount of money. So, if someone's wanting to go from, just hypothetically, 8.5% to 8%, it might look like a big amount, but it's not really in the whole scheme of things. So the exercise, if someone is fee driven, the exercise would always be to put two fee schedules side by side, look at that bottom figure, and I'm one of those people that's going to be completely honest. There are people that are driven by fees, and that's totally fine. I get that. We try to have options available for everyone, hybrid options, junior options, senior options. But if someone is basing it purely on fees, I think that they're going to not have the best investment experience, because there are other factors that are a lot more important than, and I don't think people realize you're actually not saving a huge amount of money anyway, on a standard rental of $500 a week.
Yeah. And it's very similar in the financial advice industry. People will say, oh, well, you're, X amount of dollars more expensive to this place. And they say, okay, well, this is what this place will do for you, and this is what we'll do for you, and these are the differences, and the knowledge base, and what will pack. We're not looking at just super, for instance. We're looking at property, churn, and all of these other things, and hence why that fee comes in place. So yeah, it is important that, I always think fees are an important component, but yeah, if you're paying peanuts, you get monkeys, as the saying goes.
Yeah, and there was also, I remember hearing a situation where someone was looking at a cheaper fee. So let's say they were going to be saving, just for argument's sake, $300 a year, or even $500 a year. We'll use $500 a year. But then if I said to you that I could rent out your property 2 weeks earlier, then that person, because I do unlimited viewings in the first week, and that agent will only go to the property once a week, then holistically, if you look at the big picture, you've gone with someone to save you $500 a week, but I can save you $1,000 by advertising it and marketing it straight away and getting a tenant in quicker. So I think we sometimes don't look at that whole picture. We just are so short focused.
So how can then people evaluate their property managers, to make sure they are doing a good job and they are thinking of those extra things and getting them that extra $1,000 a year, for example? What are the key things they need to think about when they're evaluating their existing property manager?
Yeah, I would be definitely you'd probably have to ask questions. You're going to have to ask them, how many times will you be opening up my property? How many times do I have to have my home open before I have a successful tenancy? At the moment, I can tell you that it's 2 to 3 home opens before a successful tenancy. Someone could then ask me, how over what time are you going to be doing 3 home opens? Well, I can tell you that 3 home opens would generally be over a 7 to 10 day period. And however, that's not because I've said I'm only doing it over 7 to 10 days. That's just because tenants availability and things like that. So you definitely do want to be checking that. A good question I get a lot is, how quickly can you put my property on the market? So that's a good one. There was a situation, I had an owner approach me to say that their person that they wanted to go with told them that their photographer was on leave and couldn't get out to the property for 7 days to photograph the property to get it online. And I was like, well, why wouldn't they just use another photographer? Or why wouldn't they go out and just sort it out themselves? Like, I wouldn't make an owner wait for 7 days so that you can use my preferred photographer. You hear these little things and you don't even think to ask that question. But, that's really important. So how quickly can you put it on the minute I say yes? How many home opens do you think I'm going to need to have my property open for? And over what period of time do you think those 3 home opens? That's going to give you a really good indication of someone moving quickly and not delaying.
Brilliant. And I guess getting into some of the finer details. So somebody's done their assessment, they've jumped on Google, they've looked at Facebook reviews, they've found their property manager, then they get sent the agreement. So what does somebody need to watch out for, or what are some of the red flags, potential pitfalls, or even just things that are normal to anyone in the industry that somebody might not be aware of that they're actually signing off to in your sort of typical property management agreement?
Yeah, a lot of it's going to come down to that the term of the agreement. I am seeing most contracts being around that 24-month period. 2 years is where most property managers would sign a client up for. We do 2 years, but not because we want to lock someone in for 2 years, just because it's it's a time management thing. If I have to renew contracts every 12 months, it's a lot of time. So it's purely for that reason. I would say that I would be very hesitant to sign a contract where it was more than 2 years. I probably wouldn't recommend that to an owner, that they sign that. So definitely keep an eye on that term, because if you don't, I have definitely seen clients be signed up for 3 years without even realizing it. The problem with that is that in our agreements, this is for WA, for our agreements, if an owner wants to break their contract earlier, even if they're wanting to sell the property or move into the property, an agent has the right to charge 50% of liquidated damages. So what that means is the management fee that agent would have got for that entire time, a property manager can charge the owner 50% of that cost. Now, just because you can doesn't mean you should, is my thought, but I can't speak on behalf of other real estate agents. I absolutely would never charge that. I think it leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth, but I do have to say that the contract does allow that. So something that a lot of owners do negotiate is by asking the agent to put a clause, a special condition in, just to say that I'm happy to sign a 2-year or a 3-year contract, but I do want a clause to say that I can terminate that with no penalty or fees, with 7 days notice or 14 days notice. I personally don't have an issue with that. I think that that's very reasonable. I don't think people are going to be leaving unless there was a serious issue anyway. So as a property manager, why would you want to hold on to that client when they're unhappy? Like, it just doesn't make sense. But there are some people out there that will enforce it. So that would probably be my biggest red flag. I don't think you'll find that you're going to find that property managers are putting in extra fees than what's been discussed. I'm definitely not seeing that or hearing that in the industry as a pain point. I think that that's pretty clear, whatever your fees that you've discussed are going to be in there. I will say, actually, I did have one come up, and it was actually quite interesting because in my whole career, this has never come up, and I sort of understood where the client was coming from. When we do like a letting fee charge, for example, the letting fee, we might say, is 2 weeks rent, and we have to use an example. So we had an example which was $500 per week, and so on 2 weeks letting fee, it was $1,100. When the client had a letting fee being charged, his rent had gone up quite a bit, and the letting fee charge was now based on $700. So that came out to be like $1,540. And he said, "Why have I been overcharged on my letting fee?" And I said, "No, you haven't. It's 2 weeks rent." He said, "My managing authority says $1,100. And I said, okay, I see where that's come from. So I sorted something out with him so everyone was happy. But I hadn't had that. And I thought that was really interesting and worth mentioning, that the example being used is just an example. It's not actually the fee. So, but that's never happened to me before, but I think a very valid point from a client. So, and then there's not really anything else in a contract. However, I would say that contracts are generally written to give a property manager full control over managing that property in terms of arranging maintenance without necessarily checking with the owner. It actually does allow a property manager to lease the property within a certain price range and lease term without consulting the owner. Best practice is to do that. We would always do that. But if you were to be technical, I could actually do it. But I guess you would, it's always good just to check that, will I get a choice of applications? Can I give you a limit for maintenance? Because a lot of clients want to be included in the decision making for maintenance. So if you read your contract, you will see whether they've put in that they're authorized to spend up to $500 without speaking to you first. You do have control to alter that and change it to a limit that you're comfortable with, or maybe the limit 0, and that should be totally fine with the agent. And I think as an investor, if you go back to the contract and ask these questions, and if there's any kickback or stubbornness, that could be a bit of a red flag that maybe they're going to be quite difficult to deal with as well.
Yeah, if that's the dating period, that's probably a good red flag to say, see you later and go and find someone else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you raise a really good point there around that, that sort of, here's my spending limit, don't bother me. I mean, a big part, certainly for me personally, and we often suggest with a lot of, this with a lot of our clients, is set that figure, whatever that figure is, $100, 500, 1,000, because, and especially as expats, most of us are tenants. Most of us don't own the place we live in. Our lives are mobile. We're moving to new countries, and we all know firsthand, and especially in Singapore, where some of the landlords are very interesting. But just getting things fixed and getting them fixed quickly without dispute or without needing to wait days, weeks, whatever it may be. So I think it's a really important one to just have that figure, whatever you're comfortable with, so that things can be done quickly. They're not bothering you, because that money's got to be spent anyway. And you going and spending an hour of your time to review quotes between $230 and $265 seems like a big waste of your time that could probably be spent elsewhere. So certainly a big fan of that one. Now, if we look at, I guess you touched on the costs quite a bit there around, what those fees could be. Could you just maybe step us through what are some of the common categories of costs? So obviously we have, letting fees you touched on, sort of property management fees, but what are the broad categories people should be aware of?
Yeah, I always break this down into two parts. The first is the ongoing management, where you've got a management fee and you've got your routine inspections. So management fee, now that's going to vary wherever you're buying in Australia, but I will give that disclosure that WA is more expensive than East Coast. So we'll just clarify that straight away. But your management fee is based on a percentage of gross collections for the property. And as the rent is received, you'll have a management fee percentage that is deducted. If your tenant pays weekly, it'll be deducted as they pay weekly. If your tenant was to pay 6 months in advance, it's going to be based on that full 6 months. So that's the first ongoing. Second would be ongoing your routine inspections. So in WA, we do them up to 4 times per year. My understanding is in different states, sometimes they don't even do inspections, but it will look different over there as well. So they're your two ongoing. And a routine inspection fee could be anywhere, generally for WA speaking, between 77 and 99 would be considered quite a normal one for that to be done. I know as an office, we are flexible with how often we do them, because if you think about it, every 12 weeks to go into a tenant's home, like a good tenant's home, like that's just a bit of a kick in the guts. Like it's very often, and there's reasons why you do need to do that, but there's plenty of reasons why you don't need to do that as well. So I would be guided by the property manager with what they feel is a good amount to do. They're your two ongoing fees that most people would base their finances on. Then you've got the second section of the fee schedule, which is the leasing and the marketing. So that will look like a advertising fee. So you'll have an advertising fee to get it onto the major portals. What a lot of owners don't realize is that we're getting charged by each portal for each property, some more expensive than others. So we actually do get a bill from the big portals every month with every property we list. So advertising, you've got a letting fee, and the letting fee is a relatively large chunk. It's generally around that 2-week mark. And the letting fee, the purpose of that is you only pay it at the start of your tenancy, of a tenancy, and it's for the process of doing all the home opens and the viewings, the application processing, negotiating the lease agreement and preparing that to get signed, and then lodging the bond. So it sort of covers that whole process, regardless of how long that leasing process takes. And then you have your property condition report. In WA, it is legislative. There's a prescribed form we have to do it on. And then that's how the property has been handed over to us. It's very much in depth and in detail, and it has to be done for each tenant to sign off on. So then when they vacate, that's how we disperse their bond. So from a financial point of view, I would be saying to clients, if a property manager needs to lease out that property for you, do expect for around the first 3 weeks of the rent to be absorbed in leasing, some sort of leasing fees. And it's just better to be very clear with that at the start, so they know that you might not see much in that first month. And then after that, it should just tick along nicely with a management fee.
I think you do a great job, Ashleigh, of explaining the different fees and actually detailing them out. Whereas, you hear a lot of people use the word hidden fees, and I've been hit with this hidden fee Do you see that, Maurice? Do you see any other costs that people call hidden fees? Probably not in your business, but maybe in the industry.
No, I'm not hearing any hidden fees, to be honest. I think all property managers are very clear with what they do. Maybe one thing that you could be clear, like people could be clear with, is that we have a lot of fees that we don't charge for, but we still do. For example, an end of year financial summary fee is a great example. We don't charge for it, but we still do it. Where if there's an agent that doesn't charge for it, there's a good chance that they don't do it either. And so maybe that could be a missing fee down the track. So a hidden fee down the track that you didn't know about. But no, we're very, very transparent. I'm definitely not hearing I don't think I've ever heard of any concerns with hidden fees that investors should be worried about. It's all very clear and simple.
Yeah, perfect. Look, let's talk about working with clients and then maybe some different stories that you've got and whatnot. And I think a great starting question for our listeners, we work a lot, with expats. Jarrad himself being an expat living in Singapore. Do you find there's any difference working with, someone, let's say myself, a resident in Australia with a property versus someone like Jarrad, an expat with a property in Australia? Do you find there's any differences in working with those two types of clients?
No difference. Where the difference would lie is where we've got intentional investors and accidental investors. So, and there's so many factors, but what it comes down to is, am I dealing with a client that I'm renting out their existing home in Australia and they've now moved with the intention of coming back to that home? That is going to definitely be more of an emotional investment. It's an accidental investor situation in that we're not managing their home that they intended on being an investment. They want to come back to it. It's accidental that they've gone overseas for work and they'll be coming back. So when we get more of an emotional client, that they are going to want to be involved in every single maintenance decision for the property because they're coming back to it, and that's absolutely fair enough. And I think a good property manager will be able to be very bespoke in their management for that client, understanding that it's not just arrange any maintenance for them. We do need to. They need to be a lot more involved in it, as opposed to what we see a lot of, but typically more interstate as opposed to overseas, where it is intentional, where we've got clients that are buying 4 or 5 properties for the purpose of investment, and they're intentional investors. They've got a business mindset, and they treat it very, very differently in terms of arranging stuff. So I think that's the difference. We've got a client in the UK at the moment. She's just purchased a property, but in Perth, but with the intention that she's going to be moving back into it in 12 months' time. So she's going to move into it in 12 months' time. So we treat that very different, but that's how it differs, not anything else. Yeah.
The rational decision making versus the emotional decision making between the investor or the owner occupier.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've certainly had plenty of those stories, haven't we, Will? Across the various clients, people have spent a fortune renovating their dream home. The handles are exactly as they wanted, and they went over budget and did all the usual stuff people do when they're renovating or building their own place, and then get the call from work. You're going overseas. Come back in 2, 3, 5 years, and of course, then the decision becomes, well, gee, do we want to leave that vacant? That's a lot of money potentially. We're missing out on. Still got the mortgage to pay. So, it makes a complete, a ton of sense, I think.
And then they come home in 5 years, like the handles anymore anyway. They're outdated by the time they're back.
Or the house is too small, they had more children, or the kids don't want to live there, or, whatever other reason shifts them elsewhere. I guess on that note, actually, we touched on, not necessarily handles going out of date, but I guess from a landlord's perspective, how does a landlord typically, and let's use Perth as an example, sort of make sure that their property remains competitive, remains attractive to tenants, whether that be the sort of initial prep work, painting or whatever else it may be, and then I guess kind of the ongoing role that a good landlord can play in the eyes of both the property manager and the tenant?
Yep. So the first thing I think is really good to understand is that tenants don't expect or necessarily want modern, pristine homes. Their As long as the property is in good, clean condition, that's all they're wanting. So that goes for an original kitchen. An original kitchen is absolutely fine as long as it's in good condition and clean. So that's what people want. I think that to stay competitive in the market, definitely having a home that is looking like it is being maintained and obviously not too run down is really important to attract that better quality tenant. I would say to a client that's not wanting to paint a property, for example, like we can lease it as is. What I'm concerned about is the quality of tenant that we're going to get that finds that painting acceptable to live in. That's my concern. It's not about renting it out. I can rent it out fine. It's getting that right tenant for you that I focus on. So generally fresh walls is a really great thing just to constantly be mindful of. And then making sure you've got a competitive rate. It's okay for a landlord to question a property manager on what they're recommending from either a lease renewal or from a marketing point of view. A property manager should have evidence and reasoning behind what they're suggesting. And I deal with many owners. The other day, I had a client that was told $660 per week for the property, and I quoted $620 per week. And she asked the question, why have they said $660? I said, I can't even find the evidence because the evidence I'm using is here and here and here. Here's a copy of it. And then she said, okay, that makes sense. I agree with what you're saying. So, that's what we've done. So a good property manager will be able to provide evidence in regards to the market rate there's two things that you need to look at. And a homeowner can actually do, an investor can do this themselves. Sure, we're going to be using a CoreLogic or RP data report, which is going to show the average, but quite often it doesn't reference supply and demand. So I would also be looking, I think supply and demand is a really important factor. Here at the moment in Perth, there are some suburbs where there's only 2 properties available for rent in the suburb. And then there's other suburbs where there's 40 properties available for rent. So as an investor, if you're about to put your property on the market for rent, I would encourage you to go to realestate.com and see how many other options tenants in the market currently have. If there are only 2 options, then sure, you can be a little bit cheekier maybe with your rent, with what you're asking, because there's not a lot of options. But if you've got a suburb where there's 40 properties, you're going to have to be pretty competitive to be seen. And I think that people should definitely trust the property manager with the price that they're recommending, but it's fair and reasonable to ask for supporting evidence on why they've chosen that price. And a confident property manager will also be able to tell an owner what to expect. So for example, the conversations I have with clients at the moment are, if I put your property on the market today, I'm expecting that the first home open, I'm going to have at least 5 people coming through. If I only get 1 person come through the home open, I'm going to say to you, the property is probably sitting a little bit high, and I would probably strongly encourage you to make an adjustment there. If I have 40 people come through the home open, there is a chance that we've gone a little bit too conservative, but I'm going to definitely be able, this is my expectation. This is what I'm hoping to see in the first home open, so that I'm giving the owner a little bit of prep that when that first home open happens, that you know what I'm expecting for the current market. And you know what my discussion is going to be with you after that home open, depending on how it goes. So I'm already planting that seed on what to expect.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I think a lot of people, and we hear this a lot of the time, where we'll sit down, we'll do the initial sort of discovery with our clients. They'll have a property, whether it's in Sydney or Melbourne or Perth, and we'll look at the yield, and it'll be a 1.5% or a 2%, which is just totally unjustified. And the common response is, "Oh, we've had this tenant forever. They're a great bloke or a great family or great whatever," some other nonsensical reason for this ridiculously low rent. And yet at the same time, and I'll use Singapore as a perfect example, 2021, 22 hit, COVID hit, rents went up 40%, but they basically went nowhere for the 10 years before that. Now, had they just gone up a gradual amount each year, we'd be in the same position, but that sticker shock wouldn't be there. We all wouldn't be feeling this huge price shock that all came at once. So I think it's a really good point, not just the initial sort of amount you're asking for, but just keeping an eye on the market, bumping it up fairly and sensibly, and, you know, working with your property manager to do exactly that, because we all complain about
Yeah, and
rates, but, you know, how often do we look at the other side?
unfortunately, you're going to look like a horrible person by doing that. So if you do gradual ones, I think it's actually healthier for a tenant's finances to have little gradual increase as well. I actually would argue that you're doing them a favor by doing that. You don't have to. So when it comes to lease renewals, and owners don't have to do this, but my recommendation is that you meet halfway between what the tenant's paying and what the market rate is. And for a tenant that you love, that you want to stay in the property and you'd be so sad if they went, generally I would say meet halfway. That's very reasonable for both parties. If it was a tenant where they're not great but you know what, they're fine. They're not bad enough to want to, you know, give them notice to vacate, then sure, you're going to go a little bit closer to that market rate. But generally, always doing, even my landlords that are very philanthropic and have been known to say to me, Ash, please don't be mean with my tenant's rent increase. Even those ones we still put up a little bit, even if it's only $10 or $20. It's really important that you get the tenant in that mindset and the cycle that there will be increases. Even if it's $5, that's really important and definitely something I'd always recommend.
Most definitely. And look, obviously as landlords too, you see a lot of costs going out as well. So making sure that you be able to maintain that property is an important component of it as well. I'm sure actually you've got tons of stories of, you know, maintenance costs and things going wrong, or doors falling off, or air conditioners breaking, or anything like that. But when it comes to, you know, dealing with your clients as landlords, what are the key property maintenance costs that you see they need to be preparing for, or some that maybe people don't think about, or they need to have in the back of their mind that it could come up, you know, both others or, you know, with strata style buildings as well?
Yeah, I love this question because it is something that's very is not talked a lot, and people don't know what's normal and what's normal when it comes to maintenance. I would say to you, in the first 12 months of owning a property, expect there to be more maintenance than any other year, and that's really important. My clients at the moment have not budgeted for that. I would say to you that, and I actually do check-ins with owners every year, so I'm sort of all over it. But and this is going to be dependent on the area that you're in. So for our portfolio for Perth, I would say to you that on average, having a plumber or an electrician out at a property once or twice per year would be considered quite normal. If I've got a client that is sending out a plumber 3 or 4 times per year, I would actually say that's bordering a little bit too top heavy, for the reason for that's a lot of call outs to get out. And call outs are quite expensive in WA. So I would probably say to my clients that have already had a plumber out 2 or 3 times, I would say to them, next time the plumber needs to go out in this 12 months, I want you to get them to do a once over everything, because I don't want them out again. So the other thing we also mindful of is it a situation where we've got a tenant that's serial spamming us with maintenance, which also can be a common thing that we do need to keep an eye on. But generally the maintenance is always quite reasonable. The example that I've been using at the moment is in my house, I've got a light switch. And the light switch is a little bit like when you press it down, it's like you've got to sort of press it to the side a little bit. It's perfectly fine. I'm not going to get an electrician out for that. But there will be a point where that switch does come off and it's going to be an urgent repair. So if I was renting this property and I had a property manager call, I called a property manager to book in a light fitting that had blown and needs replacing. If that property manager says to that tenant, listen, is there anything else in the home that's bothering you that I can get the electrician to do at the same time? Now that little light switch, I normally probably wouldn't have even thought about it because it's not really a big drama. But now that I've been asked that question, I'm going to be like, actually, can they just do that light switch? Because that's only going to cost $10, but it's going to cost the client another $120 to come back when it does actually properly blow. So I think that from an expectation point of view, 2 plumbing and electrical visits per year would be considered very normal. And I would say to you, one thing to look at is if a handyman's having to go out regularly to repair things, it could be an indication that you need to maybe do some renovations to the property. So that's sort of what is considered normal in our market. Now, equally, if you are an investor and you have had no maintenance on your property, that also can be a problem. So for those clients, I would say to them, listen, you've had no maintenance on your property, but your gutters are looking really shocking at the moment. While you've got a good tenant in the property paying rent and low costs, how about this financial year we get some quotes and maybe consider doing the gutters? So I much rather, there are certain items that can be done in a property to keep it maintained, because the problem I have seen, and this is one of like a story that does come up, is clients that don't do that and do those proactive maintenance items, when that tenant does vacate and you've got to have time to get the property back up to scratch, all of those things take time. And that spending that money on maintenance hurts a lot more when you don't have any rental income coming in at the same time. So what can you do for the property while there's income coming in that is going to help reduce that vacancy time when it becomes vacant? I think that don't necessarily just go, oh, I've had a great year, there's no maintenance on my property, if there are things that need to be done. And sure, there's properties that don't have maintenance but also don't need anything. That's fine. It's those older ones that I would definitely say to an owner, be proactive and say to your property manager, is there anything that I could do in the property while my tenant's there that would make the property more presentable?
Being proactive as opposed to reactive is a really important thing there, right? As you touched on, you're fixing problems at potentially 10% of the cost. And then when it becomes a bigger problem. Now, I've got a bit of a multi-level question for you. And really, when we look at Australia, especially a lot of our expats clients, Australia is a very well-regulated country, and our compliance, our regulations seem to change every other day, depending on what government's in and what they're doing. We deal with it consistently as financial advisors. But in the property management space, firstly, have you seen any major changes, throughout your career and lifetime? Secondly, do you anticipate any further changes, with the compliance and regulations of property management? And then thirdly, how do investors and your clients, how do they manage that? How do they navigate that, Liam?
Yeah. So the weird thing is with Australia is that there's a different legislation in each state, and that can make it very hard for landlords and investors to understand, especially when they own multiple properties in different locations. It definitely is hard. In WA, we had changes last year to our legislation. We're really lucky here because we get given notice, where other states, I've been told, don't get given any notice and it's dropped on them straight away. And it does create a lot of mistrust in the industry with clients and agents when things are changing without any warning. And yeah, we're lucky in WA. So the changes that we had last year, we have all been very positive within the industry because they were actually best practice anyway and reasonable. And a lot of us were already doing them. So for example, rent increases. Rent increases now can't be done every 6 months. They have to be done every 12 months. Now, I actually think that's reasonable. I think everyone would say, tenant or owner would say that's a reasonable situation. So we're okay with that one. And a lot of us would probably be recommending that anyway, because we would do 12-month leases and we would only renew the rent at the end of that. The second thing that came in was pets. Now it's probably would be the one that's been considered a bit of a sore point, because now owners have to accept pets. I've got a few industry friends that have had owners take the situation to court because they haven't wanted pets. Because, for example, like if expats are overseas coming back to their home, they don't want a dog living in their property or a cat. They might say they have allergies. Courts, I've had a friend go to court over it. The courts have said no, the owner can get a professional clean when they move in if they've got an allergy. So you're not going to get past that. But, I think we just have preconceived ideas that pets do damage. Pets don't actually really do damage. Humans do damage. And if I was going to tell you a horror pet story, it involves the cat. And a cat urinating. It's always a cat. I'm not a cat lover, but cats urinate in one spot of the house. And yes, that there has been damage. But I can probably give you 2 cat horror stories in 23 years. So, are we making up these little preconceived dramas that are really not that necessary? What I would say to clients though is while you can't not accept pets, you absolutely can put conditions on it. So we accepted a second cat for someone the other day because the owner had to. But we put a condition on there that we want a receipt for carpet cleaning every single year. Every January, they've got to supply one to us, and there's conditions there. That's fine to do. And then the third legislation that changed was in regards to minor modifications, but again, reasonable. A tenant should be able to secure a tool bookshelf to the wall so it doesn't fall on a child. They should be able to put some hanging points to make the home feel like a home. If it doesn't have hanging points, well, your house probably should have it. I had a tenant the other day where they asked permission to put a curtain up at their cost because they had a intruder come close and they could see through the blinds. Now, that tenant wasn't asking the owner to change the blinds to block out. That tenant was just saying, can I please fix my own curtain? That's reasonable. The owner did say that at the end of the tenancy, they just want the tenant to take the curtain because it wasn't their style for their house. And that's fine. So those are really the only major things that we've seen recently in WA that are very fine and we're okay with. One thing that we have to be careful is that, and I hope this isn't something that could come up in the future, but at the moment we can still do no grounds termination, which means that we don't have to have a reason for a tenant vacating a property. We can just give them notice that their lease isn't going to be renewed. Unfortunately, there are situations where we have tenants that pay their rent on time, look after the property, but are horrible, and are actually a personal injury risk to the owner being in the property. If that comes into place, we won't be able to evict them because you can't evict someone because they've got a crappy personality or a problem and they're paying their rent. So we want this to stay in the no grounds termination, but in other states, that has been stopped. So that will be a concern, something to consider. One other thing that I've seen in Queensland, which I really hope this doesn't come in, and it's our responsibilities as property managers and investors to make sure that we don't cause this to be a problem. So while at the moment in WA, we can do rent increases every 12 months, the 12-month increase is linked to the tenancy, not the property. So that means that if the tenant was to vacate the property, we can put whatever rent we want on the property for a new tenant, and then in 12 months from that tenant. In Queensland, the rule is that the rent increase for every 12 months is with the property. Now, what that means is that if a tenant was to vacate, let's say a tenant's in there for 6 months, they vacate, the owner does a full renovation, that owner can't increase that rent on that property for another 6 months until it's been 12 months with that property. And that is ridiculous. That's crazy that it's linked with the property. And so a tenant has the right in Queensland to ask the property manager the date of the last increase to make sure that the owner's not taking more, any rent any more frequently. So the risk, I hope that makes sense. So the risk would be in WA is if I had an owner that had a 6-month tenant and said to me, I only want to take a 6-month tenant and I want you to vacate that tenant after 6 months so I can increase my rent again. Ethically, I'd be saying to the owner, please don't do that because number one, it's wrong to do that. And number two, we're creating case scenarios for that to be argued that we need to bring that new rule into Perth. And that will be horrible if it comes into Perth as well. So we want to do the right thing by tenants. We want to do the right thing by everybody and keep with that 12 months. Do a 12-month tenancy. That's my only concern is that no ground termination being removed and potentially that rent increase being linked with the property, not the tenant.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, Ashleigh, I think you've given people a lot to think about, a lot to be aware of, probably a few things that hadn't necessarily crossed their mind if they're not in the real estate space around, terms, exits, fees to be mindful of, no grounds evictions, and WA obviously being the great state that it is. I guess, is there anything you haven't touched on that when you meet, new landlord, I mean, they might have been landlords for a number of years, but I guess when you're meeting new prospective clients that you're taking on as landlords, is there any one thing that you wish people knew more commonly when it comes to actually renting out a property?
It would probably be that I wish people, I guess, would have a bit more trust in probably more in the industry as a whole. I think that we get given a bit of a bad rap from a property management point of view, and there are just so many wonderful property managers, wonderful investors out there. I've got I don't know whether you know, I've got a big portfolio of philanthropic investors as well. And there is a lot of good in the industry. And it is a little bit frustrating, I guess, when we do get owners that don't trust what the property manager's saying. It's and go with someone that you can trust. I think that when you're choosing that property manager, which I guess what I wish people would know is ask those questions up front, have those conversations, develop that relationship very early on with property managers and real estate agents, and get to know them. Because if you can pick someone, like, I guess I work with my clients so much prior to them necessarily having a property, that trust is already there, and I would treat them like my own family members. A property manager really appreciates that trust, and that that I'm not going to do anything in your property that I wouldn't do for my own mum or dad, or my own family. And if I can't get a hold of you and there's maintenance, know that prevent further damage, or I can't get a hold of you and we needed to make a decision. And I guess that trust is really important to property managers to have. And feel free to reach out and just have a general chat with your property manager. It doesn't always need to be linked with the property. It can be a real general conversation like, hey, Ash, I haven't, heard from you for a little bit. I just wanted to check in. Is everything going all right? I'm going away on holiday in a couple of weeks. So I just wanted to let you know that if you can't get a hold of me, I'm here. You can get hold of me on WhatsApp. Those conversations I think are really great to have. Connect with your property manager on their socials, on their Instagram, on their TikTok, on their LinkedIn, and get to know them socially, and not just from like you need a plumber or your tenant hasn't paid rent. So for me, it's a little bit, I don't know, it's a bit of a holistic view, but I think that that's really great to create really healthy relationships with your property manager.
Sounds like there's a lot of similarities between financial advice and property management then, because everything you just listed is the points that we really empathize for our business as well too.
Fabulous, yeah.
Most definitely, yes. Great people in most industries. Sometimes you just have to look. But yes, actually, look, we might wrap up there. Obviously, huge thank you on behalf of Will, myself, and our team, and of course our listening community. I'm sure everyone's gotten a lot of value out of that. A lot of commonality, whether your property is in the East Coast, West Coast, middle of Australia. There's a lot to think about. Obviously, you can reach out to Ashleigh. You'll find her contact details in the notes. But reach out to her on her social channels, Facebook, LinkedIn. You'll have those contacts there. So if you are looking for a great property manager in WA, obviously have a chat with Ashleigh. From personal experience, that's been a great experience so far, and long may that continue. But Ashleigh, on behalf of us and our team, thank you very much for sharing your time with us today.
Lovely. Thank you for having me. Great chats.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ashleigh. Well, what a great interview with Ashleigh. As you touched on before the interview, Jarrad, there's a lot there that people don't really think about when it comes to property management. I know from personal experience, having a great property manager just takes off so much of that pressure, and it just gives you back so much time in your day where you don't have to think about that property and everything's getting done in the background. It's phenomenal. So thank you so much, Ashleigh, for jumping on there, answering all of our questions. It was great to have that bit of a deep dive. Now, guys, as always, we will be releasing an episode of the podcast every single month on the last Wednesday of the month. In each podcast episode, we'll be interviewing an expert ranging from topics from property to shares to estate planning to you name it, moving countries, repatriating, absolutely anything. We always want to hear from our listeners, guys. We do this for you. We do it for education, obviously for you. So if you have any topics you want us to cover, any experts you want us to interview, definitely reach out to us. We're always happy to, take on feedback and try and reach out to anyone and everyone that we can. Podcast is always on all major hosting services as well too. So Apple, Spotify, YouTube, find it wherever you listen, subscribe to us. And guys, awesome one.
Fantastic, Will. And as mentioned, do follow us on all the social channels. We are at Money Side Up, no spaces, no hyphens. drop us a note. If you have a question, you have a topic, we'd love to hear from you. Even if you just want to share your own story, your own experience, your own case study. Again, if it adds value to our community, we'd love to create an episode on it. So always feel free to reach out to Will, myself, the team. We'd always love to hear from you. I've got a really exciting speaker, or guest rather, lined up for next month. So don't miss that one. There is plenty going on this year. I'm sure it's going to be a very busy 2025 with plenty to update everyone on. But wishing everyone a great month ahead. Thank you again for tuning in, and really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Until next time, guys.